Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to a first look of Traces of War, published by Vuca Simulations and designed by Tetsuya Nakamura. This is a two-player World War II East Front game covering the Soviet offensive after the Battle of Kursk against the Axis forces in Ukraine from August 1943 to March 1944. Let's take a look at the components, talk about some of the mechanics, and offer some initial impressions on gameplay. So let's start out by taking a look at the components of the game, and I will say that as we start out, I've heard a couple of commenters on other videos that they've really liked the work of Tetsuya Nakamura as a designer, so I'm very interested to see how this plays. This will be my first game of his that I've had a chance to play. Now the box is about 1 inch thick. We've got paper maps, which this is the first time I've seen a Vuca simulation that has that in there, which creates the thinner element to this game here in terms of design, in terms of scope and size of the box and things. But let's take a look at some of the general characteristics here on the back, starting with the game meter complexity rating of a 4. I feel like that is spot on. I've read through the rules. There's about 18 pages of them. We'll take a deeper look at the rules as we look inside, but it feels right. I feel like, especially if you are familiar with hex and counter war games, I feel like this could even be lighter than a 4, perhaps as a 3, because there are a number of mechanics, combat resolution, movement, supply, zones of control, that are going to feel very similar to other traditional hex and counter war games that you've played in the past. So if you are an experienced hex and counters war gamer, I think you're going to be able to jump into this game very quickly and move along. And it didn't take me long to read the rules at all. There are some novel mechanics in here that I do want to talk about that I think are going to give it a fresh appeal, but at the same time, there's a good base of familiarity that's going to kind of enhance the learning and make it kind of a very smooth learning process to be able to pick this game up. Solitaire suitability is listed as a 9 out of 10. I feel like that's a little bit of a reach. I think for me personally, if you're going to have a 9 out of 10 in a solitaire game, it almost indicates to me that there's a dedicated solitaire AI bot for the game. But in this game, you're going to be playing both sides if you're playing it solitaire. So you're going to play the Soviets and you're going to play the Germans. Now, there is a solo player track that we'll take a look at, but that's really kind of a tracking system for the game. It doesn't represent any kind of an AI intelligence or a structured gameplay mechanic that's going to kind of dictate play for one side. Having said that, I do think I would go with perhaps a 7 or an 8 out of 10 for the solitaire. This game uses a chit pull system that I think is going to make solitaire play extremely fun. I think the chit pull mechanic, especially the way it's executed in this game, is perfectly suited for solitaire because it's constantly switching sides and asking one side to kind of react to the situation that the other side has created. So I think for a solitaire game, this looks like it's going to be very juicy indeed. I think it's going to work extraordinarily well. And I want to talk more about the chit pull system as we get into it later on. But so yes, I'm very positive about it as a solitaire experience. I just probably wouldn't go quite as high as a 9 out of 10 in a solitaire rating. A couple of the general characteristics about the game that are listed here as game features in terms of that. Divisions for the Germans and Army Corps for the Soviets. Each turn represents 1 month. A hex is about 20 kilometers across from side to side. Playing time of the game is 3 to 6 hours. We'll take a look at the 2 scenarios in the game as we get more inside. But those are some general characteristics about the game. And now let's open it up and take a look at what is inside. So we'll put this off to the side. We get a black and a red die, so dice are going to be used for combat resolution. Let's jump in and take a quick look at the rulebook, and I want to come back to it to talk a bit about later about some of the chit pull mechanics here. We have got a 16-page rulebook. I read through the rules last night. It took me, I want to say, I was kind of reading them slow and a little bit of depth to kind of say, can I jump right in and start playing? And I'm going to say it took me about a half an hour, maybe 40 minutes to go through them all. Not a tough job at all in terms of getting through the rules. And kind of even to highlight some of the elements, the shorter elements of them here, the last 2 pages of the rule book here are historical notes and then a work on a kind of a couple historical artifact on Erich von Manstein, the German general of the time in this battle here too. So really the rules end on page 13, and the first page here and the cover, pages 1 and 2, are kind of the table of components and some abbreviations. So really it's 12 minus 2. It's really about 10 pages of rules. I read through them as well. I feel like they're very clear. You never quite know until you start playing. But every time a question was popping up in my head about some of the rules, I found the answer to it right away, either nearby or it came up shortly after that, or there was a reference to where to find it in the rules. So I felt like the rules are very well organized. There's 2 columns. Text is a pretty good size. We got a lot of graphic and some examples to kind of highlight how the rules work. As I read through them, I felt like, wow, this is just a really smooth learning experience that's just going to make kind of getting into the game pretty easy. So I don't think there was anything in here that looked particularly problematic. I felt like this is a good rule set. And again, you don't 100% know until you start playing, but after a while you kind of get a sense for, yeah, this is a clean rule set. I think it's going to make learning how to play easy, and it's going to make executing the game very, very easy. So from that perspective, I think this is going to be a game that's going to be easy to get to the table, and it's going to be very accessible too. So yeah, kudos on what looks like a very good rule set so far. And I want to come back to them later as we talk about one of the mechanics in the game here too. Now this is the solitaire track sheet, and I was kind of curious as to what this is, but basically when you have the game playing map, you have some of the Soviet kind of tracking systems on one side of the game map and the Axis tracking systems on the other side of the game map. So this tracking track sheet here brings all of those systems right in front of you as the solitaire player, so you don't have to be reaching across the map. So there isn't anything tremendously mysterious or extravagant about this. It's just a player aid that's designed to help you as a solitaire player manage the information you need without having to reach all over from the map for those pieces that would be on each side of the board for a Soviet and German player. So there we go, that's that, and we can see kind of, you know, victory points and crossing points and things like that. Now let's take a look at the counters. As always, my goodness, and I should say this is a very hard kind of card stock with a covering on it too. All of the components in this Vuca Simulations, of course, up to their kind of standards, except again for the map. And I think that's obviously a choice in terms of where they want to put this game in terms of production costs and marketing costs and things like that. But again, these counters are absolutely fabulous. We have 3 counter sheets, all front and back, and we can see, let's start here. This is number 2. Let's start with number 1. We're looking at the Soviet unit. So the darker red are the Guards units here, and the lighter red, the kind of the rose-colored ones, are the standard Soviet units. And each kind of sheet here is printed on both sides. So there is a kind of a 2-step system here. You get full strength, depleted strength, and then you get the wiped out strength, the kind of, you remove it if it's gone here too. I will also say as well, for a number of these units on the back side, you can see hex numbers, and this tells you where the unit starts in terms of setup on the game. And some of them are reinforcements and come in through later gameplay and things like that too. But it's kind of a player aid. You can pick the unit up, flip it over, and say, okay, I know exactly where it goes. So that's kind of a really neat kind of a setup mechanic that I think is going to speed up the setup of the game. And as we take a look at the map, there's another kind of player aid that's on the map itself that's going to make setting up the game go pretty quickly here too. So for the units here, we have basically 2 characteristics. We have a strength, a combat strength. So we'll look at one of the infantry units. The middle number is the infantry combat strength. The right number is the movement strength. And then armors have armored units have a slash, and mechanized units have a slash there. That's attack and defense. So stronger on the attack and weaker on the defense. So yeah, really neat counter set. Those are the Soviet counters here. Let's go to counter sheet 2 here, which are the Axis forces. We have Romanian units are this lighter kind of gray, darker here. I think these are the 2 Hungarian units. And then we have the standard Axis units in here. And I should also mention, and we'll take a look here on counter sheet 3, you have the option, as I've seen done in other games now as well, you can use either these armored tank silhouettes for your armored units, or if you prefer the NATO symbols, you can use the NATO symbol. So there's 2 for each armor or mechanized unit. You've got 2 options. You can either use the armored NATO designation, or you can use the silhouette for the vehicle. So I particularly like the silhouettes, but it's really cool to have the option because I know people, there's like one or the other. So again, these are the mostly German Axis units. We have some Soviet units up the top here. Again, flipping them over, we can see the backside again with some of the hex numbers in here for helping with setup locations and things. I should also mention too, as we kind of take a look at these alternative armored counters here, what we're starting to get in here, these are the headquarter units, and command and control is a big element of gameplay. Each of these command headquarters has a command radius, and that is where that chit pull system comes into play. Down the bottom here, we can see these kind of obscured characteristics. If we flip them over, these are the different chits that are going to be pulled. So gameplay works with a chit pull system. I want to talk a little bit more detail about that later, but these are those chits that actually use this. So you're going to be picking it out. You're going to get, okay, this is a Soviet kind of kind of division here that's going to go. Soviet, say for example, the 3rd Ukrainian, 4th Ukrainian, and generally there's some restrictions on how these can be put in, but so you never quite know what's going to come out of the chit pull cup there and whose segment of each turn it's going to be. So gameplay is going to kind of go back and forth that way with this unique chit pull system that they've got in play. And I'll elaborate on that in a little bit more here too. We also have, before we get to the maps themselves, we have 2 sets of 2 player aids. So identical player aids here. This, I believe, is player aid A. Is that right? No, player aid B. Let's take a look at player aid A. Player aid sheet A has all of kind of the high frequency the sequence of play on this one side. This is all the high frequency information you will need, the sequence of play, and then kind of a detailed extrapolation on the sequence of play and what you're doing in each one of these elements of the sequence of play. And then all of your combat charts are on the back of that major one. So we have the terrain effects chart here, combat results table, negotiation points. I want to talk about this as part of that chit pull mechanic because that's really cool. Negotiation points costs, and then different kind of tips on calculations and some of the other elements of combat and gameplay that you're going to need. These again are nice heavy cardstock. They feel kind of like tablet-y, so they really feel like you feel like a general when you're holding these things. I really like these. These feel really cool. Then the second one here, we have player aid sheet B. This kind of starts with what this is. It seems to me what they've done here is they've culled out of the rule book a lot of the high frequency rules that they feel players are going to be diving back into the rule book to find. So they've taken the information and the kind of the high frequency important rule elements here and distilled them down to this two-sided player aid that's going to be able to help speed up gameplay. So instead of diving back into the rulebook, I think the design intent here is that you're going to be able to find your information on these player aids to avoid kind of thumbing through the rulebook to kind of have to figure out where that high frequency information is. So I really like these types of player aids that kind of enhance the kind of, if you would say, the weaning away from the necessity to look up in the rule book. So it just kind of speeds up gameplay and I think speeds up the learning of the game too. I should also mention here too about the scenarios in a little bit of depth. There are 2 scenarios in the game because they get brought up in the rule book there too, but it's just a small element of that. Each of the 2 scenarios has the same starting condition, so they're going to start with the same exact starting setup, which is in August of 1943. The first scenario goes 4 months, 4 turns, which takes you through basically half of the full 8-month campaign, and then each of those 2 scenarios have specific victory conditions. And there's a victory point system for the Soviets, so you're tracking Soviet victory points. And that's probably a good time to mention too, as we kind of transition into taking a look at the maps. This is very much a Soviet offensive and a German mobile defense. So as we kind of lean about and think about what would be some things I'm looking towards exploring in gameplay, one of the things with a situation like this is how fun is it to play the Germans? Because you're going to be kind of basically executing a mobile defense. You win by limiting the amount of victory points the Soviets get. So the Soviets are always going to be, most likely be, in a positive victory point total. And I think for the 8-month campaign game, it's like 60 or 65 points they need to get to win. And if they are below 65 points, Germans win, kind of thing. Likewise, the shorter scenario, the 4-month, has a lower victory point total. So as the Germans, you're trying to limit the damage, and I'm curious to see how fun, because sometimes that can be done well in a game, and sometimes that can be really tedious to play because you're just basically a punching bag. And so I'm really curious to see how that plays out. I do get a sense, as we're going to talk about some of the chit pull mechanics in a moment, that I think the way it's designed with that chit pull mechanic, it's going to be a fun and challenging defensive situations for the Germans. So I'm excited to kind of give it a shot and to see how it plays out. And with enough of that babbling, let's take a look at the maps here. Now these are paper maps. There are 2 of them. Each one is a little bit over 20 inches wide, and I'll show a zoomed out view of both of these together. They fit together to create a 41-inch wide by 28-inch tall map. So that gives you kind of the footprint that you're going to need for the game. The only thing else that's really going to sit off the map are maybe some units and those player aids that you can probably put someplace else. So I think the full footprint of the game, there's no cards or anything like that. So the full footprint of the game is probably going to be, again, almost exactly that 41-inch by 28-inch on the vertical there to give you an idea of this. One of the cool things about this is that, you know, we're looking at the top up here, if we kind of see that. This is the German side of the map, so all the German information is over here at the top of the map, and then this is the Soviet side. But each of the cities here are also labeled from both sides. So you can see it in Cyrillic, and then also in its kind of romanization, if you would, for the German forces. So you've got two different viewpoints on it. And the map looks really cool. I think it's really streamlined design. It's really easy to visually interpret. This paper itself here, it's kind of a matte finish, but it feels like it's got some good kind of strength to it as well. And then you're basically just overlaying one. I'd probably play this under plexiglass if I weren't going to do some video on it. I would definitely probably try to get a piece of plexiglass to put on top of this, kind of flatten it out and make moving things around a little bit easier here. So one other thing to talk a little bit about too, and I'll show a close-up of this as we look at it here, we can see these crossing points, and these are these orange kind of outlined hexes here. These are big because these represent crossing points over a major river, and that's what you're trying to get control of as the Soviet forces. And that dictates a number of victory points that you're going to be able to pick up. The other thing, and this is probably a good time, let's actually take a look at the other half of the map here too, because there's some other things to point out as well. So here we can see the other side of the map, and I think these actually go together in a different way, but we've got some more crossing point hexes here. We've got some of the larger cities here like Stalino, Kharkov is here too. So again, this represents, what is modern day Ukraine. And then on this side of the map here, we can see a lot of the numbered designations, and these are the starting designations for the setup. So this gives you all of your setup information for both scenarios just embedded right into the map. And we saw again how the counters had the numerical hex number on the back as its starting location. So you've got a couple of ways that I think that are going to really speed up kind of the setup of the game, because as we can see, this setup for the game spans, all the way from this side of the map. So it's going to be, I would probably guess maybe 15 minutes to a half an hour to set the game up. It's going to take a little while to get all these pieces down and get things in place before you're going to be able to ready to start the game. So this numbered system here, so this is the number of the division or the army corps where it's going to go. So we can see 6G is the 6 guards and stuff like that, 28 guards and everything. So yeah, that's going to help speed up gameplay, as well as the numerical designations for the hexes on the back side there. But yeah, I really like the maps. I think they're really clean, really easy. I like the player aids around them. We've got reinforcements and things like that that are kind of off here on the side for the Soviets as well. And with that, I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of other elements here too that are represented in the game. So I mentioned the Soviets can win by amassing a certain number of victory points. They also have, this is kind of, which I really think it's kind of ties into the chit pull mechanic. One of the things I'm looking forward to playing with this game is that there is kind of the strategic command interference in the theater for the Axis side. And how that's represented in gameplay is that each of the 6 major cities, so Kharkov being one of them, Kiev being the other, Stalino being the other one, there's 6 of them in the game, they start out designated as cities of strategic critical importance. And they're going to have a little marker on them, and that means that the Germans have to defend those cities. If the Russian forces take that city, take a city that's designated with that strategic level of importance, they instantly win the game. So you might be saying, well, wait a second, how do the Axis forces take care of that? And that's what's really cool. One of the chits that the German player has is this OKH chit system. And if you pull that chit out of the cup, that's going to dictate a number of actions that you can take. One of the actions that you can take is this negotiations element. You can use a certain amount of points to lead a negotiation with Supreme Command that's going to get you to be able to remove the strategic importance marker from a city. Now that costs 3 negotiation points, and I think anytime you get one of these chits, you're going to get anywhere from 3 to 5.5 of those negotiation points. So what you end up with is, as the German player, do you want to bring reinforcements into the theater, or are you going to try to pull one of those markers, basically which says, as the German forces, you're allowed to to concede that city up to the Soviet Union without ticking off the strategic command back in Berlin. So it's a really kind of neat way of kind of creating the influence from the German Supreme Command in the theater and forcing you as a player to deal with that. So that mechanic, I think, looks really fun. And that leads me to believe that as the German player, playing this game where you're going to be thinking, okay, do I want reinforcements? Wait a second, the Soviet Union could take Kharkov, and right now it's a city of strategic importance. So I really need to negotiate with Supreme Command to have them allow us to give that city up so we don't lose the game if the Soviet Union forces take Kharkov before we can get that strategic marker taken away from it. So I think it's a really creative, kind of fun and innovative way for a war game to depict kind of Hitler's influence and Strategic Command's influence in the theater. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays. The other element of that is how that integrates with the chit pull system. So in the chit pull, not only do you pull chits for a command headquarters unit, and if you do that, any unit that's within the command radius of that headquarter is going to be activated. So you're going to have this kind of this kind of back and forth action between one side and the other. There's a couple of other unique elements to that. One of which is that at the start of the turn, the German player can hold those chits in their hand and not commit them to the cup. And at any point in the turn, at any point in an action phase, the German player can commit one of those chits into the cup to be potentially pulled out later. So what that allows the German player to do is, if they have a very good defense and they're kind of defending against the Soviet Union, you probably want to say, okay, we want the Soviet Union to go first. I definitely don't want to go first here. So I'm going to keep my chit out of the cup until this headquarter goes and they start making their move. And then I'm going to see what kind of a mess they create. And then I want to be able to pull that chit out in order to be able to react to that situation. So it kind of creates this way for the German player to kind of react to the Soviet troops. At least that's the way I think it's going to play out. So I'm really kind of interested to see how that plays out. The other element of the chit pull system that's intriguing me is the way that there's chits for reinforcement and there's also a chit for supply. So there isn't a supply phase per se in the game. It's if you pick the supply chit, which is common to both players, if you pick the supply chit out of the cup, both sides have to check supply and apply the impacts of being out of supply or being back in supply. So you might get that early in a turn, and then the next turn you get it late in the turn. So it could create all kinds of different kind of intriguing elements of gameplay by having a chit pull kind of supply system that is really dependent on when it gets pulled out of the cup. Likewise, reinforcements work that way as well too. And over here on this side, for example, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reinforcement schedules. These are not the turns these reinforcements come in. These are when that chit gets pulled. So as the Soviet, the first time you pull the reinforcement chit, you're going to get this one here all the way up to 6. And you have some influence as you're kind of building up the turn as to how many and what types of chits, whether you want to have 2 headquarters going in, whether you want to have different elements for the Germans going in. So you've got some control over what kind of chits are going in the cup as well too. So it seems like that's the thing that makes me think, wow, this is going to be kind of a very innovative and fun game to play. Second thing is, I think perhaps that chit pull system is going to make managing the German side feel less like a punching bag and feel more like something dynamic that you're going to have a lot of control over too. And lastly, again, as we go back to it, I think that chit pull system is really what's going to make the solitaire system be a joy to play, because I love chit pull systems for solitaire games. It just really feels like it's going to be, to me, something that makes solitaire play really fun and sharp, and you've always got to be kept on your toes. So there we have it. We're taking a look at the map, player aids, the counters, solitaire track, the rulebook. We've talked a little bit about dice. We've talked a little bit about the command pull system, the chit pull system, some of the interference from Strategic Command from Germany. That, I think, is a look at the components and some initial impressions on gameplay for Traces of War from Vuca Simulations and designed by Tetsuya Nakamura. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I will be bringing kind of a review or some kind of gameplay to the channel about this game at some point in the near future. So I look forward to taking a look at it. Looks like to me it's going to be a very kind of fun, easy to learn hex and counters game with some innovative twists on the chit pull mechanics and kind of strategic interference that's going to make playing this game and this part of the East Front campaign a really kind of interesting kind of war game to dig into. So very excited to give it a look. Let me know if you've got questions. I'll put a link up here to another one of Vuca Simulations game, the Chase of the Bismarck. We did unboxing and did a playthrough on that. I'll put a link to the first episode for that playthrough campaign that we did with the turn-based game that we did with Chase of the Bismarck. Thanks everybody for watching and have a great day.